There's no room for you in this house anymore. Leave! My son Marcus shouted, his face twisted with a rage I'd never seen before, as he held the front door open on that December evening. What he couldn't have known was that my departure would trigger a chain of events that would expose the elaborate scheme his girlfriend had been orchestrating, or that within 24 hours he'd be standing in a police station, begging for my help as the only person who could prove his innocence, in a crime he was about to be framed for. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Dorothy Chen, and this is the story of how being thrown out of my own home by my son became the very thing that saved his life. It's a story about a mother's intuition, a calculated deception, and how sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing when to step back, even when every instinct tells you to hold on tighter. Growing up as the daughter of Chinese immigrants in Minneapolis during the 1950s taught me the value of family above all else. My parents, who had fled Shanghai during the Civil War, built their lives around three principles: work diligently, honor your elders, and protect your family at all costs. These weren't just words to us. They were the foundation upon which we built our entire existence in a country that didn't always welcome us with open arms. My father ran a small tailoring shop on Lake Street, where he worked 14-hour days altering suits for businessmen who sometimes forgot to pay. My mother took in laundry and taught piano lessons to neighborhood children, her broken English never diminishing her ability to communicate through music. They saved every penny, not for themselves, but for my education and future. Family is the only true wealth, my mother would tell me as she carefully mended clothes by lamplight. Money can be lost, houses can burn, but family bonds, when properly tended, last forever. This philosophy shaped every decision I made throughout my life. When I met my husband, Peter, at the University of Minnesota in 1971, I was drawn not just to his gentle nature, but to his deep respect for family traditions. Peter was a second-generation Korean American whose parents ran a small grocery store in St. Paul. Like me, he understood the sacrifices immigrant parents make and the unspoken obligations their children carry. We married in 1973 in a small ceremony that blended both our cultural traditions. My parents prepared traditional Chinese dishes, while Peter's family contributed Korean specialties, creating a feast that represented the merging of our families. The wedding photos, which I still keep in a leather album on my bookshelf, show two young people who believed that love and family loyalty could overcome any obstacle. Peter worked as an electrical engineer while I taught high school chemistry. We saved carefully, living in a modest apartment near the university campus while putting aside money for our future children's education. When Marcus was born in 1978, followed by his sister Jennifer in 1981, we had already purchased a small 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood with good schools. Those early years raising our children were filled with the typical joys and challenges of family life. Marcus was a curious child who asked endless questions about how things worked. I remember finding him at age 6, having disassembled our kitchen radio to understand its components. Rather than scolding him, Peter sat with him for hours, teaching him how to reassemble it properly. Knowledge-seeking should never be punished, Peter explained when I worried about Marcus's tendency to take things apart. We need to guide his curiosity, not suppress it. Jennifer was different, artistic and intuitive where Marcus was analytical and methodical. She filled our house with drawings and stories, creating elaborate worlds populated by characters who went on grand adventures. The two siblings complemented each other perfectly, Marcus helping Jennifer with her math homework while she taught him to see the beauty in literature and art. We established family traditions that honored both our heritage and our American lives. Sunday dinners were sacred. No matter what activities or commitments arose, we gathered around our dining table for a home-cooked meal. Peter and I took turns preparing dishes from our respective cultures, teaching the children to appreciate their diverse heritage while building new traditions as a unified family. Education remained paramount in our household, but not at the expense of character development. We volunteered as a family at the local food bank, participated in neighborhood cleanups, and opened our home to international students who needed a familiar meal and conversation. These experiences taught Marcus and Jennifer that success meant more than academic achievement. It meant contributing to your community and helping those in need. When Peter died suddenly of a heart attack in 2005, our family foundation shook, but didn't crumble. Marcus had just started his career as a software developer, while Jennifer was completing her master's degree in social work. They both returned home immediately, putting their lives on hold to help me navigate the overwhelming grief and practical challenges of losing a life partner. Dad would want us to take care of each other, Marcus said during those dark days, taking charge of funeral arrangements and financial matters with a maturity that both comforted and saddened me. At 27, he stepped naturally into a protective role, handling details I couldn't face while ensuring Jennifer and I had space to grieve. The months following Peter's death revealed the strength of the family bonds we had cultivated. Marcus moved back home temporarily, commuting to his job in downtown Minneapolis. Jennifer deferred her final semester to stay with me. We grieved together, sharing memories and supporting each other through the waves of loss that threatened to overwhelm us individually, but couldn't break us collectively. Gradually, life resumed its rhythm. Jennifer returned to school and completed her degree, eventually taking a position with a nonprofit serving immigrant families, work that honored both her grandparents' journey and her father's memory. Marcus threw himself into his career, earning promotions and recognition for his innovative software solutions. I returned to teaching, finding solace in the familiar routine of lesson plans and student interactions. For the next few years, our family found a new equilibrium. Marcus purchased a condo near the technology district but visited regularly. Jennifer married David, a fellow social worker she met at a conference, and they settled in a neighboring suburb. Sunday dinners continued, now including David and, eventually, Jennifer's 2 children. The tradition evolved but endured, adapting to our changing family structure while maintaining its essential purpose, keeping us connected. I decided to retire from teaching when I turned 65. 40 years in the classroom had been fulfilling, but I looked forward to having more time for my grandchildren and the volunteer work I'd begun at the community center. My colleagues threw a wonderful retirement party, and former students sent letters describing how my chemistry classes had influenced their career choices. These tributes meant more to me than any professional accolades. Retirement also allowed me to spend more time with Marcus, who had remained single despite my gentle and sometimes not so gentle hints about settling down. He claimed his work consumed too much time for serious relationships, developing software for medical devices that required extensive testing and regulatory compliance. I worried about his social isolation but respected his choices, trusting that he would find companionship when ready. The house where I'd raised my children gradually became too large for one person. The stairs I'd climbed effortlessly for decades now required careful attention. The garden Peter had lovingly maintained grew wild despite my efforts. When Marcus suggested I consider downsizing, I resisted initially, unwilling to leave the home where so many memories lived in every corner. "It's just walls and floors, Mom," Marcus argued during one of our Sunday dinners. "The memories come with you wherever you go." He was right, of course, but knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally are vastly different processes. I spent months going through possessions, deciding what to keep, what to pass on to the children, and what to donate. Each item carried stories. The china set my mother had saved for and given us as a wedding gift. Peter's workshop tools still arranged as he'd left them. Boxes of school projects and report cards documenting my children's growth. Jennifer helped with the sorting, her social work experience valuable in navigating the emotional aspects of downsizing. Think of it as curating your life, she suggested. You're choosing what matters most to carry forward. Marcus took a more practical approach, researching senior living communities and smaller homes that would be easier to maintain. He created spreadsheets comparing costs and amenities, mapped distances to medical facilities and shopping centers, and evaluated safety ratings for different neighborhoods. His thoroughness reminded me of Peter's methodical approach to major decisions. After extensive research and several family discussions, we decided I would move to a smaller house in the same neighborhood rather than a retirement community. The single-story ranch home was just 8 blocks from my original house, allowing me to maintain connections with longtime neighbors and familiar shops. Marcus oversaw renovations to ensure the home met my needs, installing grab bars in bathrooms, improving lighting, and creating an accessible garden space. The move itself took place in spring 2019. Marcus took time off work to coordinate the IC logistics while Jennifer organized friends and family to help with packing and unpacking. My grandchildren, then 8 and 10, made the process feel like an adventure, excitedly exploring their grandmother's new home and claiming the spare bedroom as their special space for sleepovers. That first night in my new home, I sat in the living room surrounded by boxes yet feeling oddly settled. The house was smaller, but filled with carefully chosen items that truly mattered. Peter's favorite reading chair occupied a corner near the window. Family photos covered one wall, chronicling our journey from young parents to grandparents. My mother's china was displayed in a cabinet, waiting for the next family gathering. Over the following months, I established new routines. The smaller garden proved more manageable, allowing me to maintain Peter's tradition of growing tomatoes and herbs. I joined a book club at the library and volunteered additional hours at the community center. Marcus visited regularly, often, bringing takeout from our favorite restaurants for impromptu dinners. It was during this period of adjustment that I first sensed a change in Marcus. Subtle at first, canceled dinners, shorter phone calls, distracted responses during conversations. When I asked if work was particularly demanding, he offered vague assurances about temporary project pressures. As weeks passed, the distance grew more pronounced. Then, in September 2019, Marcus announced he was seeing someone. The news itself didn't surprise me. I'd hoped for years he would find companionship. What caught me off guard was his delivery, casual to the point of dismissive, as if mentioning an inconsequential work meeting rather than a potentially significant relationship. "Her name is Kendra," he said during one of our increasingly rare dinners. "She works in marketing for a tech startup." I expressed happiness for him and asked the natural follow-up questions. How did they meet? How long had they been dating? When might I meet her? His answers were uncharacteristically evasive. They'd met through mutual friends. They'd been seeing each other for a while. He'd bring her by when their schedules aligned. Weeks turned to months with no introduction forthcoming. Marcus's visits became less frequent, our phone conversations shorter and more surface level. When I mentioned this change to Jennifer, she confirmed similar patterns in her interactions with her brother. "He seems different," she observed during one of our coffee dates. "Distracted, maybe even secretive. It's not like him." I wanted to attribute the changes to new relationship energy, the natural tendency to focus intensively on a romantic partner during the early stages. Yet something felt fundamentally off about Marcus's behavior. The son who had always shared his life openly now deflected questions and avoided meaningful conversation. Finally, in January 2020, Marcus brought Kendra to Sunday dinner. She was attractive in a carefully constructed way: styled hair, designer clothes, perfect makeup that must have taken hours to apply. Her greeting was warm but felt practiced, like an actor delivering well-rehearsed lines. Throughout dinner, I observed their dynamic with growing unease. Kendra dominated the conversation, speaking about Marcus as if he weren't present. She mentioned their plans to renovate their condo, though to my knowledge Marcus lived alone. She discussed investments they were making together, vacation properties they were considering, business ventures that required significant capital. Marcus remained largely silent, occasionally nodding agreement but contributing little to these grand plans. When I tried engaging Kendra about her background, her family, education, career history, she deflected with the skill of a practiced politician. Her parents had passed away. She'd studied back east. Her work history was varied and entrepreneurial. Each non-answer was delivered with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. After they left, I sat alone in my kitchen, deeply troubled. The woman my son had introduced seemed less like a romantic partner and more like a carefully crafted persona. Her interest in Marcus appeared primarily financial, her affection performative rather than genuine. Most concerning was Marcus's passive acceptance of her dominance, so unlike the confident man he'd always been. I called Jennifer to share my impressions, finding she'd reached similar conclusions. She kept talking about Marcus's money like it was already hers, Jennifer noted. And did you notice how she shut down any real questions about herself? We agreed to monitor the situation carefully without interfering. Both of us recognized the delicate balance required, expressing concern without pushing Marcus away. He was a grown man, capable of making his own decisions, yet his changed behavior suggested an influence that worried us both. Over the following months, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Marcus missed family gatherings, claiming work obligations that Jennifer's husband, who worked in the same industry, confirmed were likely fictitious. When he did appear, Kendra accompanied him, controlling conversations and monitoring his phone calls. The few times I managed to speak with Marcus alone, he seemed exhausted and stressed, but insisted everything was fine. By summer 2020, the pandemic had provided Kendra with additional tools for isolation. She convinced Marcus that I was high risk and shouldn't be visited. Phone calls became rare, always with Kendra audibly present in the background. The son who had helped me through Peter's death and my recent move now felt like a stranger. The situation reached a breaking point in December 2020. I'd made multiple attempts to arrange a birthday dinner for Marcus, each rebuffed with increasingly transparent excuses. Finally, I decided to visit his condo uninvited. A boundary I'd never previously crossed, but felt necessary given the circumstances. When I arrived at Marcus's building that cold December evening, I found my key no longer worked. The doorman, who'd known me for years, looked uncomfortable as he explained that my access had been revoked. I called Marcus from the lobby, and when he answered, I could hear Kendra's voice directing his responses. "I'm downstairs," I said simply. "I'd like to wish you happy birthday in person." The silence stretched uncomfortably before Marcus spoke, his voice strained. "This isn't a good time, Mom. We're busy." "It's your birthday," I pressed gently. "Surely you have 5 minutes for your mother?" More muffled conversation than Kendra's voice came on the line. "Dorothy, this is inappropriate. Marcus has asked for space and you need to respect that. Please leave, or we'll need to contact building security." The threat, delivered by a woman I'd met fewer than 10 times, sent cold fury through me. This was my son, in the home I'd helped him purchase, being kept from me by someone who'd appeared in our lives less than 2 years ago. I demanded to speak with Marcus directly. When he finally came to the lobby, alone, thankfully, I barely recognized the man before me. He'd lost weight, his clothes hung loosely, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. The confident professional I'd known had been replaced by someone who looked perpetually anxious. "Mom, you can't just show up like this," he began. But I interrupted. "When did I become someone you need permission to see?" I asked. "What has she done to you?" His face hardened at the question. "She hasn't done anything. You're being paranoid and controlling, just like she said you would be. This is exactly why we need boundaries." "Boundaries?" I repeated incredulously. "Marcus, you've cut off your entire family. Jennifer hasn't seen you in months. You've missed every family gathering. This isn't boundaries. It's isolation. Maybe I'm tired of family obligations, he shot back. Maybe I want to live my own life without constant interference. Kendra understands that. She supports my independence. The words sounded rehearsed, foreign coming from the son who had always valued family connections. I tried reasoning with him, pointing out the changes in his behavior, his appearance, his relationships. Each observation was met with defensive, anger and accusations of my attempting to control his life. Our conversation spiraled into the worst argument we'd ever had. Marcus accused me of never accepting his choices, of trying to run his life, of being jealous of his relationship. The charges were so far from reality that I initially couldn't formulate responses. When I finally found my voice, his reaction was explosive. "You've never liked any woman I've dated," he declared, which was patently false. I'd maintained friendly relationships with several of his former girlfriends. "You want to keep me dependent on you forever." "I want you to be happy," I countered. "And you clearly aren't. Look at yourself, Marcus. When did you last sleep properly? When did you last see your doctor? When did you—" "Enough!" he shouted, drawing stares from lobby security. "I'm done with this interrogation. Kendra was right. You're toxic, and I need to protect myself from your manipulation." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Toxic? Manipulative? These words had never been part of our family vocabulary, and hearing them from Marcus felt like listening to a stranger reading from a script. "She's feeding you these words," I said, quietly. "This isn't how you talk, how you think. Marcus, please, go home, mother," he interrupted, his voice cold. "And don't come back. There's no room for you in my life anymore. Leave." The finality in his tone, the formal use of mother instead of mom, the dismissal of decades of love and support, it all combined into a moment of devastating clarity. I stood in that modern lobby, fluorescent lights reflecting off polished marble, and realized I'd lost my son to someone who had systematically dismantled our relationship. "If that's what you want," I managed to say through the tightness in my throat. "But remember, Marcus, I'll always be your mother. When you need me, and I believe you will, I'll be waiting." He turned without responding and walked to the elevator. I watched until the doors closed, then made my way out into the December cold. Snow was beginning to fall, dusting the sidewalks with the kind of pristine white that would soon turn to gray slush. As I waited for my ride home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. That intuition, the same maternal instinct that had told me when my children were ill before symptoms appeared, that had warned me of Peter's deteriorating health before his fatal heart attack, now screamed that Marcus was in danger. Not physical danger, perhaps, but something more insidious. Kendra wasn't just a controlling girlfriend. She was something far more calculating. The ride home passed in a blur of city lights and swirling snow. I sat in my small house that night, surrounded by photos of happier times, and made a decision. Marcus had ordered me to leave, and I would respect his wishes. But I wouldn't abandon him. Sometimes the greatest act of love is strategic retreat, pulling back not in defeat, but to regroup and prepare for what's coming. I couldn't have known then that within 24 hours, Marcus would be calling me from a police station, desperate for my help. I couldn't have predicted that my forced absence would be the very thing that exposed Kendra's elaborate scheme. All I knew was that my son was in trouble, and despite his harsh words, I would find a way to help him. As I prepared for bed that night, I noticed the family photos on my dresser, Peter and me on our wedding day, the children as babies, family vacations and celebrations spanning decades. In every image, we looked happy, connected, unaware of future challenges. But we'd survived loss before. We'd weather this storm too, even if the path forward remained unclear. The next morning would bring the shocking revelation Marcus couldn't have anticipated when he banished me from his life. But that December night, all I had was a mother's faith that love, patient, persistent, and sometimes strategic, would ultimately prevail. The morning after Marcus banished me from his life, I woke at 5:47 a.m., the exact time I'd risen every day for 42 years of teaching. Some habits run too deep to break, even in retirement. As I made my morning tea, a ritual that had sustained me through countless challenges, I reflected on the experiences that had prepared me for this moment of crisis. My career as a high school chemistry teacher had taught me more than just how to balance equations or explain molecular structures. It had honed skills I never imagined would prove crucial in saving my son from a carefully orchestrated deception. For over 4 decades, I'd observed human behavior in its most revealing context, the classroom, where teenagers' attempts at subterfuge were both transparent and instructive. "Mrs. Chen always knows when you're lying," my students would warn incoming freshmen. This reputation wasn't built on intuition alone, but on systematic observation of behavioral patterns. The way a student's voice changed pitch when fabricating an excuse for missing homework, the excessive detail provided to support a false narrative, the defensive body language that preceded an elaborate deception. These tells became as familiar to me as the periodic table. My approach to teaching chemistry paralleled my approach to understanding people. Both required careful observation, hypothesis testing, and evidence-based conclusions. Just as chemical reactions followed predictable patterns, human behavior revealed consistent indicators when someone departed from their authentic self. This scientific method of interpersonal analysis had served me well throughout my career and would prove invaluable in the days ahead. Beyond the classroom, my experience with troubled students had taught me when to push and when to retreat strategically. I'd worked with countless teenagers struggling with family issues, peer pressure, and destructive relationships. The most effective interventions rarely came through direct confrontation, but through creating circumstances where truth could emerge. Naturally, I remembered Amy Holstrom, a brilliant student whose grades plummeted junior year. Direct questions yielded only defensive responses and increased withdrawal. Instead of pressing harder, I assigned her a lab partnership with Michael Torres, knowing his steady presence and gentle humor might create the safe space she needed. 3 weeks later, she confided about her older boyfriend's controlling behavior. By stepping back and orchestrating supportive circumstances, I'd achieved what direct intervention couldn't. This strategic patience had been reinforced through raising my own children. Marcus, in particular, had tested these skills during his teenage years. His tendency to stretch truth required careful handling. Too much pressure caused him to dig deeper into deception, while complete acceptance enabled problematic behavior. I learned to create what Peter called truth opportunities, situations where honesty became the easier path than continued fabrication. My understanding of family dynamics came not just from personal experience, but from decades of parent-teacher conferences. I'd observed how family systems operated under stress, how communication patterns established in childhood persisted into adulthood, and how external influences could disrupt even the strongest family bonds. These observations created a mental database of relationship patterns that now helped me recognize Kendra's systematic isolation tactics. The Chinese immigrant community in Minneapolis had provided another educational dimension. Within our tight-knit network, I'd witnessed numerous cases of financial exploitation, often targeting successful first-generation Americans through romantic relationships. The patterns were remarkably consistent: rapid relationship progression, isolation from family, joint financial ventures appearing suddenly, and the victim's defensive protection of their exploiter. My role as unofficial translator and advocate for elderly community members had exposed me to sophisticated scams that relied on cultural misunderstandings and emotional manipulation. I'd helped Mrs. Liu recover funds from a business partner who'd exploited her limited English skills. I'd assisted the Wang family in documenting how their son's girlfriend had systematically drained his accounts. These experiences had taught me both the warning signs of exploitation and the importance of careful documentation. Peter's death had inadvertently provided another form of preparation. Handling estate matters, insurance claims, and financial transitions had required me to navigate complex bureaucratic systems. I'd learned which documents carried legal weight, how to maintain meticulous records, and when official channels required supplementation through personal connections. This administrative competence would prove crucial when Marcus's crisis demanded rapid action through various systems. My volunteer work at the community center had kept these skills sharp in retirement. As coordinator for the senior advocacy program, I'd helped dozens of elderly residents handle everything from Medicare fraud to housing disputes. Each case had reinforced the importance of maintaining detailed records, understanding legal procedures, and knowing when to escalate concerns to appropriate authorities. The network of contacts I'd developed, social workers, legal aid attorneys, police officers, would soon prove invaluable. Financial literacy had become another area of expertise. Through necessity, after Peter's death, I'd taken control of our investments and retirement planning. Marcus had initially offered to manage these matters, but I'd insisted on maintaining independence. This decision had required intensive self-education about financial instruments, investment strategies, and fraud prevention. The knowledge gained through this process now allowed me to recognize troubling patterns in Kendra's supposed business ventures. My technological competence, while not native to my generation, had been deliberately cultivated. Teaching in the digital age had required constant adaptation, and I'd embraced each new platform and tool. This willingness to engage with technology had extended into retirement. I maintained active social media profiles, used various messaging apps to communicate with grandchildren, and understood how digital footprints revealed behavioral patterns. These skills would prove essential in documenting Kendra's activities and building evidence of her deception. The morning routine I'd established in retirement reflected the organizational skills honed through decades of lesson planning. My kitchen counter held 3 notebooks, one for daily observations, another for financial records, and a third for family matters. This systematic approach to information management had been inspired by Peter's legal documentation methods, but adapted to my own needs. As I sipped my tea that December morning, I opened a fresh page in the family notebook. December 21st, 2020, Day 1 post-confrontation. I wrote, then began documenting every detail I could recall from the previous evening's encounter. Marcus's exact words, his physical appearance, the timing of Kendra's interjections, the doorman's expression, nothing was too minor to record. This habit of detailed documentation, ingrained through years of maintaining student records and incident reports, would provide crucial evidence in the days ahead. My teaching experience had also developed my ability to remain calm under pressure. Whether handling classroom emergencies, angry parents, or administrative conflicts, I'd learned to compartmentalize emotions and focus on solutions. This emotional regulation allowed me to approach Marcus's situation strategically rather than reactively, despite the personal pain his rejection had caused. The network of relationships I'd built over decades provided both emotional support and practical resources. Former colleagues still working in education had children Marcus's age, offering comparative perspectives on normal versus concerning behavior patterns. Parents of former students, now established in various professions, remained in contact through social media and community events. These connections created an informal intelligence network that would prove valuable in understanding Kendra's background. My reputation in the community had been carefully cultivated through consistent ethical behavior and reliable support for others. When the Johnsons faced foreclosure, I'd connected them with pro bono legal assistance. When young Sarah Kim needed scholarship recommendations, I'd spent hours crafting compelling letters. When the community center faced budget cuts, I'd organized fundraising efforts. These acts of service had created a reservoir of goodwill that, I could now draw upon without embarrassment. Physical health maintenance had been another priority in retirement. Daily walks, regular swimming at the community center, and careful attention to nutrition had kept me more vigorous than many peers. This physical resilience would prove important as the coming days demanded long hours of investigation, travel, and emotional stress that might have overwhelmed someone less prepared. My spiritual practice, rooted in both Buddhist philosophy from my mother's tradition and Christian ethics from Peter's background, provided emotional ballast during turbulent times. Daily meditation helped maintain mental clarity, while prayer offered comfort when circumstances felt overwhelming. This spiritual grounding allowed me to trust in larger patterns of justice even when immediate prospects seemed bleak. The analytical skills developed through teaching chemistry translated directly to investigating human behavior. Just as chemical reactions required specific conditions to proceed, human actions emerged from identifiable circumstances and motivations. By examining the reactants in Marcus's situation, his vulnerability after years of isolation, Kendra's targeted approach, the catalyst of their meeting, I could predict likely outcomes and potentially intervene to alter the reaction's course. My experience with curriculum development had taught me to work backward from desired outcomes. In education, this meant designing lessons that built toward specific learning objectives. Applied to Marcus's situation, it meant identifying the end goal, his recognition of Kendra's deception, and constructing experiences that would lead naturally to this realization. Direct confrontation had failed, indirect revelation remained possible. Laboratory safety protocols had instilled habits of risk assessment and contingency planning. Before any experiment, I'd required students to identify potential hazards and prepare response strategies. This same approach now guided my thinking about Marcus's situation. What were the potential dangers? How might Kendra escalate if threatened? What protective measures could be implemented without alerting her to scrutiny? The patience required for teaching teenagers had prepared me for the long game sometimes necessary in adult relationships. Not every lesson landed immediately. Some concepts required multiple exposures before clicking into place. Similarly, Marcus's recognition of Kendra's true nature might not come through a single revelation, but through accumulated evidence presenting itself over time. My understanding of learning styles helped me recognize that Marcus would need to discover the truth through his preferred modality. As a visual and kinesthetic learner, he'd always grasped concepts better through direct experience and tangible evidence than through verbal explanation. This insight suggested that merely telling him about Kendra's deception would be less effective than creating circumstances where he could observe it firsthand. Years of grading papers had developed my ability to detect plagiarism and fabrication. Students often revealed themselves through subtle inconsistencies, anachronistic references, style changes mid-document, claims that didn't align with demonstrated knowledge. These same detection skills now helped me identify discrepancies in Kendra's carefully constructed persona. Parent-teacher conferences had taught me the delicate art of delivering difficult truths. The parents who heard criticism defensively often had children who repeated their patterns. I'd learned to present concerns through objective observation rather than subjective judgment, to offer specific examples rather than general accusations, and to frame discussions around shared goals rather than blame. These communication strategies would guide my approach if opportunity arose to share my concerns about Kendra with others who might influence Marcus. My experience with standardized testing had reinforced the importance of objective metrics over subjective impressions. While intuition might suggest a student was struggling, test scores provided indisputable evidence. Similarly, while my maternal instincts screamed warnings about Kendra, building a case would require concrete documentation rather than emotional appeals. The scientific method itself, observation, hypothesis, experimentation, analysis, provided a framework for approaching the crisis. My observation: Marcus's behavior had changed dramatically since meeting Kendra. My hypothesis: she was systematically isolating and manipulating him for ulterior motives. The experiment: strategic withdrawal to see how the situation evolved without my direct involvement. The analysis would come from whatever data emerged. In my absence, committee work in education had taught me about institutional dynamics and the power of collective action. No single teacher could change school policy, but united faculty could influence administration. Perhaps Marcus couldn't be reached individually, but if others in his life began noticing concerning patterns, their collective voice might penetrate. His isolation. My years of summer professional development had maintained intellectual flexibility and openness to new approaches. Just as teaching methods evolved with research and technology, strategies for helping family members required adaptation to changing circumstances. What worked with teenage Marcus might not work with adult Marcus, especially under Kendra's influence. Budget constraints in public education had fostered creative problem-solving skills. Limited resources had required innovative approaches to achieve educational goals. This same resourcefulness would be necessary in addressing Marcus's situation without access to expensive private investigators or legal interventions. The collaborative nature of education had demonstrated the value of diverse perspectives. The best solutions often emerged from interdisciplinary teams combining different expertise. As I considered how to help Marcus, I recognized the need to consult with others who might offer insights beyond my own experience: psychologists, legal experts, financial advisors, or others who'd encountered similar situations. My role in curriculum: committees had developed skills in long-term strategic planning. Educational changes required multi-year implementation with careful attention to sequencing and dependencies. Similarly, helping Marcus recognize Kendra's deception might require patient execution of a carefully orchestrated plan rather than expecting immediate results. Finally, decades of teaching had reinforced fundamental faith in human capacity for growth and change. Even the most challenging students could transform given proper support and circumstances. This optimism sustained hope that Marcus, despite current circumstances, retained the ability to recognize truth and reclaim his authentic self. As morning light gradually filled my kitchen, I closed the notebook and prepared for the day ahead. My phone remained silent. No apology from Marcus, no follow-up to our confrontation. But I felt oddly prepared for whatever would come next. 4 decades of teaching had equipped me with more than subject knowledge. It had provided a toolkit for understanding human behavior, documenting patterns, building networks, and intervening strategically when direct action failed. The tea had grown cold as I wrote, but I barely noticed. My mind was already working through possibilities, applying analytical skills honed through thousands of classroom hours to the most important challenge I'd ever faced. Kendra might have succeeded in isolating Marcus temporarily, but she'd underestimated the resources available to a retired teacher with time, motivation, and decades of experience in recognizing deception. I didn't yet know that within hours, events would unfold that vindicated every instinct I'd developed through years of observing human behavior. I couldn't predict the specific crisis that would send Marcus to the police station, desperate for my help. But I was ready as 42 years of teaching, a lifetime of family dedication, and hard-won wisdom could make me. The phone would ring at 2:17 that afternoon, Marcus's panicked voice replacing the cold dismissal of the previous evening. But that morning, I simply prepared, organizing documents, reviewing notes, and trusting that the skills developed over a lifetime of service would guide me through whatever came next. Sometimes the best qualification for handling a crisis isn't professional expertise, but the accumulated wisdom of careful observation, patient dedication, and unwavering love tempered by strategic thinking. As I moved through my morning routine, I felt the strange calm that comes from recognizing your life has prepared you for exactly this moment. Every parent-teacher conference, every troubled student, every family crisis, Every community intervention had been practiced for this ultimate test. Marcus had ordered me to leave, and I had. But leaving physically didn't mean abandoning him to his fate. Sometimes the most powerful position is the one that appears powerless, watching and waiting for the moment when carefully cultivated skills can make the crucial difference. The house at 4827 Riverside Drive had been more than just our family home. It had been the crucible where values were forged, traditions established, and bonds strengthened through both celebration and crisis. To understand how we arrived at that painful December confrontation, you need to understand the foundation that was built over decades, brick by careful brick. Peter and I had purchased the house in 1977, when I was 7 months pregnant with Marcus. The two-story colonial with its wraparound porch wasn't the most practical choice for new parents. The stairs were steep, the radiators clanked, and the kitchen needed updating. But Peter had fallen in love with the built-in bookshelves in what would become his study, and I'd been charmed by the breakfast nook overlooking the backyard where our future children would play. "We'll grow into it," Peter had promised, running, his hand along the oak banister that 3-year-old Marcus would later use as a slide, much to my terror. Houses aren't just about present needs. They're about future possibilities. That philosophy had guided our parenting as well. We didn't just raise our children for who they were, but for who they might become. Every decision, from choosing their schools to establishing household rules, considered both immediate needs and long-term character development. This forward-thinking approach had served us well until Kendra's arrival disrupted patterns established over decades. Our morning routine had been sacred throughout the children's upbringing. No matter how hectic life became, breakfast happened at the round table in our sunny nook. Peter would read interesting snippets from the newspaper while I packed lunches. Marcus, even as a teenager, would share his plans for the day, while Jennifer would sketch in her notebook between bites of cereal. These moments of connection, repeated thousands of times, had woven the fabric of our family identity. "Information shared is connection maintained," Peter would say when the children complained about our breakfast requirement. "Families that don't talk together don't last together." His slightly mangled aphorisms always made us laugh, but the underlying wisdom proved sound. Those morning conversations had revealed everything from Marcus's first crush to Jennifer's decision to change college majors. Sundays had belonged entirely to family. After Peter's death, I'd maintained this tradition even when it meant driving to Jennifer's house in St. Paul, or convincing Marcus to leave his Minneapolis condo. We'd cook together, share meals, and simply exist in each other's presence. The specific activities mattered less than the consistency. The knowledge that no matter what challenges the week brought, Sunday would restore our connections. Our living room had hosted countless family meetings over the years. The brown leather couch where Peter always sat still bore the indentation of his presence. The coffee table, scarred from decades of use, had supported everything from board games to college applications to difficult conversations about teenage transgressions. It was in this room that we'd discussed Marcus's decision to pursue computer science instead of engineering, Jennifer's choice to enter social work, and 1,000 smaller decisions that shaped their paths. The values we'd instilled weren't abstract concepts but lived practices. When 8-year-old Marcus had found a wallet on the playground, we'd spent an entire evening tracking down the owner, turning the incident into a lesson about integrity. When Jennifer had been excluded from a middle school clique, we'd discussed the difference between popularity and genuine friendship, principles she later applied in her social work career. Trust had been the cornerstone of our family structure, but it was trust with verification. Trust but confirm became our family motto, a balance between believing in each other's good intentions while maintaining healthy accountability. We'd check homework not from suspicion, but to stay involved in our children's education. We'd verify weekend plans not from distrust, but to ensure safety. This approach had created transparency without suffocation, independence within structure. Peter's legal background had influenced our family's approach to conflict resolution. Arguments weren't suppressed, but channeled through established procedures. Each person could present their case without interruption, evidence was considered objectively, and decisions were made based on family principles rather than individual preferences. This systematic approach had prevented small disagreements from festering into major rifts. Precedent matters, Peter would remind us during family debates. The decision we make today affects similar situations tomorrow. This legal thinking had created consistency in our parenting. If Marcus received certain privileges at 16, Jennifer could expect the same. If one child faced consequences for specific behavior, the same would apply to the other. This fairness had prevented resentment and reinforced our family's commitment to justice. Our dinner table had been a classroom for broader life lessons. Peter would pose ethical dilemmas from his legal practice, with details changed for confidentiality, and we'd debate various perspectives. I'd share scientific breakthroughs from my classroom, connecting them to everyday life. These discussions had taught our children to think critically, consider multiple viewpoints, and articulate their positions clearly. The house itself had evolved with our family's needs. Marcus's room had transformed from nursery to teenage cave to young adult, space as he progressed through life stages. The basement had shifted from playroom to homework center to Marcus's computer lab where he'd built his first PC. Each renovation had reflected our children's growing independence while maintaining family cohesion. Financial transparency had been another family principle. Unlike many parents who shield children from money matters, we'd involved Marcus and Jennifer in age-appropriate financial discussions. They'd understood our budget constraints, participated in savings goals, and learned the value of delayed gratification. This openness had prepared them for adult financial responsibility, or so I'd believed before Kendra's influence. Holiday traditions had created rhythms that sustained us through difficult times. Christmas Eve was for immediate family only, with homemade dumplings representing my heritage and sugar cookies honoring Peter's traditions. Birthdays included breakfast in bed and the honored person choosing all meals. These rituals had provided stability during life's uncertainties, anchoring us to shared experiences when external circumstances shifted. Education had been valued above material possessions in our household. While neighbors purchased new cars or took exotic vacations, we'd saved for college funds and educational opportunities. Marcus had attended computer camps instead of Disney World. Jennifer had participated in volunteer programs abroad rather than beach resorts. These choices had shaped their values and career paths in ways we couldn't have anticipated. Our approach to dating and relationships had been carefully balanced. We'd welcomed our children's romantic interests into our home while maintaining appropriate boundaries. Peter had been particularly skilled at making boyfriends and girlfriends feel comfortable while subtly assessing their character. His legal training had served him well in these evaluations. He could extract significant information through seemingly casual conversation. Actions reveal character more than words, Peter had counseled both children about relationships. Watch how they treat service workers, how they handle frustration, how they discuss their families. These behaviors predict future patterns better than romantic gestures. This wisdom had generally served them well, though Marcus's analytical nature had sometimes overshadowed his emotional intelligence. Communication patterns established in childhood had persisted into adulthood. Marcus had always been more reserved than Jennifer, processing internally before sharing conclusions. We'd learned to create space for his analytical approach while gently encouraging more frequent updates. Jennifer, conversely, had thought out loud, sharing every development in real time. These differences had required adapted parenting strategies that continued into their adult relationships. The family photo wall in our hallway had chronicled our journey through decades. School pictures, vacation snapshots, holiday gatherings, each Image had captured moments that seemed ordinary then but proved precious in retrospect. Marcus's high school graduation photo had shown a serious young man already focused on his future. Jennifer's college portrait had radiated the warmth that would define her social work career. Peter's last family photo had captured his gentle strength just months before his fatal heart attack. Our garage had been Peter's domain, organized with legal precision. His tools had hung in designated spots, each outlined in marker to ensure proper return. This systematic approach had influenced Marcus's later organizational habits. His condo had reflected similar attention to order and efficiency. Until Kendra's arrival had begun disrupting established patterns. The backyard garden had been my contribution to our family space. Each spring, we'd plant together. Vegetables for practical harvest, flowers for beauty. The children had learned patience watching seeds transform into plants, responsibility in daily watering, and satisfaction in literal fruits of their labor. The metaphorical lessons had been equally valuable, teaching that growth required consistent nurture and that neglect had visible consequences. Family game nights had fostered both competition and cooperation. Monopoly had taught negotiation skills, Scrabble had expanded vocabularies, chess had developed strategic thinking. These sessions had revealed personality traits, Marcus's methodical planning, Jennifer's creative solutions, Peter's good-humored competitiveness, my quiet observation before decisive moves. The dynamics established during these games had echoed in our later family interactions. Household chores had been distributed democratically, with assignments rotating to ensure everyone learned all skills. Marcus could cook basic meals, do laundry, and maintain a clean space, abilities that had served him well in independent adult life. Jennifer had mastered basic repairs, financial record-keeping, and garden maintenance. These practical skills had been as important as academic achievements in preparing them for adulthood. Our approach to technology had evolved with the times while maintaining human connection as priority. We'd been early adopters of home computers for educational purposes, but had restricted usage to common areas. Television had been limited to shared viewing rather than isolated consumption. Even as adults, our children had maintained these balanced relationships with technology until Marcus's recent withdrawal into digital isolation. Music had filled our home regularly. Peter had played piano adequately, if not brilliantly, providing accompaniment for holiday singing. I'd maintained my mother's tradition of playing classical music during homework time. Marcus had experimented with guitar in high school, while Jennifer had sung in school choirs. These musical experiences had created shared memories and taught appreciation for collaborative creation. Books had occupied every available surface, reflecting our diverse interests. Peter's legal texts had shared shelves with my scientific journals. Children's literature had gradually given way to young adult novels, then college textbooks. Reading had been modeled as both entertainment and education. The habit had persisted. Jennifer's social work library and Marcus's technical manuals had continued our family tradition. Travel had been modest but meaningful during the children's youth. Road trips to national parks had taught appreciation for nature and American history. Visits to relatives had maintained cultural connections. These journeys had been educational opportunities disguised as vacations, expanding worldviews within budget constraints. The travel bug had bitten both children, Jennifer's international social work, Marcus's tech conferences, though recent isolation had curtailed his professional networking. Illness and injury had tested our family resilience periodically. When Marcus had broken his arm at age 10, the family had rallied to help with daily tasks his cast prevented. Jennifer's appendectomy at 15 had required schedule adjustments and shared responsibilities. These medical challenges had reinforced our interdependence and taught practical caregiving skills that would prove valuable during Peter's final illness. Extended family relationships had been cultivated despite geographic distance. Annual reunions had maintained cousin connections. Holiday cards had tracked family developments. Video calls, once technology allowed, had bridged physical gaps. These efforts had created a broader support network, though Kendra's influence had recently severed many of these connections for Marcus. Community involvement had been expected rather than optional in our household. We'd volunteered at food banks as a family unit. School events had seen our regular participation. Neighborhood associations had benefited from our engagement. This civic responsibility had shaped our children's understanding of social obligation. Jennifer's career choice directly reflected these early experiences. Financial crises had occasionally tested our stability. Peter's law firm downsizing had required temporary budget adjustments. My unpaid summer breaks had meant careful planning. These challenges had been addressed openly, teaching our children that financial stress was manageable through planning and cooperation rather than secret shame. This transparency had perhaps made Marcus more vulnerable to Kendra's financial manipulation. Milestone celebrations had been marked with consistent traditions. Birthdays included storytelling about the honored person's birth and early years. Graduations featured handwritten letters from each family member expressing pride and hopes. These rituals had created emotional anchors, marking life's passages with intentional recognition. Marcus's recent birthday, the one that had precipitated our confrontation, had broken this decades-long tradition. The evolution from active parenting to adult friendship had been gradual but successful, until recently. Weekly phone calls had replaced daily interactions. Advice had been offered only when requested. Independence had been respected while maintaining availability for support. This delicate balance had worked well until Kendra's systematic disruption of established patterns. Looking back now from my smaller house just blocks away, I could trace how each element of our family life had prepared me for this crisis while potentially making Marcus vulnerable to manipulation. His analytical nature, nurtured through years of systematic thinking, had perhaps blinded him to emotional manipulation. His trust in logical arguments had made Kendra's calculated approach particularly effective. The very stability of his upbringing might have left him unprepared for someone who operated without ethical constraints. Our family's emphasis on honesty had assumed others shared similar values. The transparency we'd practiced had expected reciprocal openness. These assumptions had served well within our community, but had left Marcus exposed to those who viewed trust as weakness to exploit. As December snow continued falling outside my window, I reflected on how 3 decades of careful family building could be threatened by one person's calculated interference. The traditions, values, and connections established over years had proved more fragile than I'd imagined when faced with deliberate sabotage. Yet the foundation remained, dormant perhaps, but not destroyed. The stage had been set through decades of intentional family culture. The actors had been shaped by years of consistent values and practices. The conflict had arrived in the form of Kendra, whose systematic dismantling of family bonds had revealed both strengths and vulnerabilities in our carefully constructed family system. Now, banished from my son's life, I could only trust that the foundation we'd built would ultimately prove stronger than the forces trying to destroy it. The first time I heard Kendra's name was on a humid Thursday evening in late August 2019. Marcus had called during my weekly grocery shopping, unusual timing that should have registered as significant. I was comparing pasta brands when his name appeared on my phone screen. "Hi, honey," I answered, shifting my cart to the side of the aisle. "Everything okay?" "Everything's great, actually." His voice carried an energy I hadn't heard in years. "I wanted to tell you I've met someone." I set down the box of rigatoni, giving him my full attention. "That's wonderful. Tell me about her." "Her name is Kendra Winters. We met at a tech conference last month in San Francisco." The detail felt oddly specific, both names, location, and time frame delivered in one breath, as if he'd rehearsed the introduction. But parental excitement overshadowed any initial concerns. Marcus had been single for nearly 3 years. claiming work demands prevented serious relationships. Hearing genuine enthusiasm in his voice was enough to make me overlook subtle oddities. She must be special, I said, resuming my shopping with the phone pressed to my ear. What does she do? She's in venture capital, focuses on tech startups. Really understands my world, you know? The demands, the potential, the vision needed to succeed. That phrase, understands my world, would echo through my mind months later. At the time, it seemed like natural compatibility. Marcus's previous relationships had often foundered on partners not comprehending his intense work schedule or technical passions. Finding someone within the industry seemed logical, even ideal. When do I get to meet her? I asked, adding milk to my cart. Soon, he promised. We're still figuring things out, but soon. The call ended with Marcus's assurance that this relationship felt different from previous ones. I finished shopping, with a lighter heart, pleased that my son had found companionship. If I'd paid closer attention to my instincts rather than my hopes, I might have noticed the orchestrated quality of his announcement. Too smooth, too prepared, too unlike Marcus's typically understated communication style. 2 weeks passed before he mentioned Kendra again. This time he called on a Sunday afternoon while I was repotting orchids on my back deck. His voice carried the same uncharacteristic animation. Kendra and I went wine tasting in Napa this weekend, he announced. She knows the owner of this exclusive vineyard. Got us a private tour and tasting. That sounds lovely, I replied, though privately wondering about the speed of their relationship's progression. Wine country weekends seemed intimate for such. A new connection. Did you enjoy it? It was incredible. Kendra has connections everywhere. She's introducing me to a whole new world. Investors, entrepreneurs, people who can really advance my career. The emphasis on networking and career advancement struck me as oddly transactional for a romantic relationship. But I reminded myself that younger generations often mixed personal and professional spheres more fluidly than my generation had. Perhaps this was simply modern dating. I'm glad you're happy, I said, focusing on reporting rather than judging. Your voice sounds lighter than it has in months. I am happy, he confirmed. Happier than I've been in years. Kendra just gets me. Gets what I'm trying to build with my work, sees the potential others miss. This theme, Kendra's unique understanding of his professional aspirations, would become a constant refrain in subsequent conversations. Each time we spoke, Marcus emphasized how perfectly she comprehended his ambitions, how expertly she navigated his industry, how valuable her connections proved for his career advancement. September arrived with Marcus canceling our standing lunch date. Kendra planned a surprise weekend in Chicago, he explained, meeting some potential investors in the medical device field. The cancellation itself wasn't concerning. Adult children have competing priorities, but the pattern it initiated would prove significant. Over the following weeks, Marcus missed 3 family dinners, 2 coffee dates, and Jennifer's birthday celebration. Each absence was explained by opportunities Kendra had arranged: networking events, investor meetings, exclusive gatherings where important connections could be made. He's infatuated, Jennifer observed during one of our walks around Lake Harriet. Remember when David and I first started dating? I probably neglected everyone for a few months too. Her comparison seemed reasonable, though something felt different about Marcus's situation. Jennifer's early relationship with David had involved romantic absorption, constant texting, dreamy expressions, endless conversation about personal compatibility. Marcus's descriptions of Kendra focused almost exclusively on professional advantages and career opportunities. Romance seemed secondary to networking. October brought the first visual evidence of Kendra's existence. Marcus texted a photo from what appeared to be an upscale restaurant, him in an unusually expensive suit sitting beside a striking blonde woman. Kendra was undeniably attractive in a polished, professional way. Her smile seemed practiced, reaching her lips, but not quite her eyes. Something about her pose, angled perfectly toward the camera, hand positioned to display an impressive watch, suggested conscious image construction. "She's lovely," I texted back, studying the photo more carefully. Marcus looked happy but somehow diminished beside her commanding presence. His typical confident posture had given way to something more tentative, as if he were adjusting himself to compliment her rather than maintaining his own space. The speed of their relationship's progression accelerated through fall. By November, Marcus was mentioning shared investments and joint business ventures. The casual nature of these references, dropped into conversation as established facts rather than new developments, troubled me. When had they moved from dating to financial entanglement? Why hadn't such significant steps warranted discussion? "Kendra found this amazing investment opportunity in biotech," he mentioned during a brief phone call. "We're pooling resources to get in at the ground floor." "That sounds like a big step," I ventured carefully. "Have you known her long enough to be making joint investments?" "Mom, when you know, you know," he replied with uncharacteristic dismissiveness. "Kendra's track record speaks for itself. She's made several clients very wealthy." The conversation ended before I could probe further. This pattern, mentioning significant decisions as fait accompli rather than seeking input, marked a departure from Marcus's typically methodical approach to major choices. Throughout his life, he'd researched extensively, sought multiple opinions, and proceeded cautiously with important decisions. This new impulsiveness felt foreign to his established character. Thanksgiving provided the first extended observation of their dynamic. Marcus brought Kendra to Jennifer's house for our family gathering, her debut at a major family event. She arrived bearing an expensive wine selection and immediately took charge of conversation, dominating discussions with stories of international travel and high-stakes business deals. "The key to successful venture capital," she explained while carving turkey she'd insisted on handling, "is recognizing potential others miss. Take Marcus's company, for instance. Most investors see medical devices as slow-growth sectors, but with the right connections and strategic positioning." She continued elaborating on plans for Marcus's career that seemed to surprise even him. When had they discussed repositioning his company? Why was she speaking as if decisions had been made that Marcus himself seemed unaware of? Throughout dinner, I observed their interactions carefully. Kendra frequently spoke for Marcus, answering questions directed at him with possessive authority. When Jennifer asked about his latest project, Kendra intercepted with a detailed explanation that left Marcus nodding silently. When David inquired about weekend plans, Kendra outlined a schedule Marcus appeared to be hearing for the first time. "She's certainly assertive," Jennifer observed while washing dishes. "Did you notice how she kept cutting Marcus off mid-sentence?" I had noticed, along with Marcus's passive acceptance of these interruptions. The son who'd always articulated his thoughts clearly now deferred constantly to Kendra's interpretations. His professional accomplishments were reframed through her lens. His opinions were filtered through her perspective. His very presence seemed to shrink in proportion to hers. "Maybe he's just being polite," I suggested, though privately sharing Jennifer's concerns. New relationships require adjustment. But this felt like more than adjustment. It resembled transformation. The confident professional who'd built a successful career through careful analysis and steady progress was morphing into someone unrecognizable. Kendra's influence seemed to be overriding Marcus's established personality with alarming efficiency. December's first warning came through a canceled family tradition. For 15 years, Marcus and I had attended the Minneapolis Institute of Art's holiday exhibition, a mother-son tradition that had survived his teenage years, college distance, and professional demands. This year, he texted a brief cancellation. "Can't make the museum. Kendra scheduled meetings with investors." The disappointment cut deeper than missed plans. This tradition had been sacred, protected time we'd both prioritized regardless of other commitments. Its casual dismissal for vague investor meetings signaled shifting priorities I found troubling. When I called to suggest rescheduling, Marcus seemed confused about why I was upset. "It's just the museum, Mom. We can go anytime." "We've gone every December for 15 years, I reminded him. "It's our tradition." "Traditions have to evolve," he replied, words that sounded scripted rather than authentic. "Kendra says successful people adapt rather than cling to outdated patterns." That phrase, Kendra says, had begun appearing with increasing frequency. Kendra says successful people network constantly. Kendra says family obligations can limit professional growth. Kendra says emotional attachments to traditions reflect resistance to change. My son's independent thoughts were being replaced by Kendra's pronouncements, delivered with conviction that suggested complete absorption of her worldview. The next significant shift came through financial revelations. During a brief coffee meeting in early December, one of our increasingly rare face-to-face encounters, Marcus mentioned liquidating some investments. "Market timing is crucial," he explained. Kendra identified a narrow window for maximizing returns before year-end tax implications. "Which investments?" I asked, trying to sound casually interested rather than concerned. "The mutual funds Dad helped me set up, some bonds, a few other things." He waved dismissively, as if the specifics were unimportant. "Kendra's handling the details. She has expertise I lack." Those mutual funds represented years of careful growth, selected by Peter for stability and steady returns. The bonds had been Marcus's security cushion, purchased with his first significant bonus. Their sudden liquidation felt reckless, especially under someone else's guidance, but my attempts to discuss the decision met with defensive resistance. "Do you not trust my judgment?" Marcus asked, his tone sharpening. "Or is it Kendra you don't trust?" "I trust you completely," I assured him. "I'm just surprised by such major financial changes without discussion. I'm 38 years old, Mom. I don't need permission to manage my own finances." The conversation deteriorated from there. Marcus accused me of treating him like a child, of resenting his independence, of being jealous that someone else now influenced his decisions. These accusations felt rehearsed, as if he were repeating arguments he'd heard rather than expressing personal feelings. When we parted, the warmth that had always characterized our relationship seemed noticeably cooler. The final transformation became apparent at what would be our last family dinner before the confrontation. Marcus arrived late, apologizing tersely while Kendra launched into an explanation of the important call they'd been handling. Throughout the meal, she dominated conversation with investment strategies and networking opportunities, while Marcus sat silently, checking his phone repeatedly. When I tried engaging him directly about his work, a topic he'd always discussed enthusiastically, Kendra answered for him. "Marcus's current projects are transitioning," she explained. "We're repositioning his expertise for more lucrative markets." "I'd love to hear Marcus's thoughts on that," I said pointedly. She laughed with practiced charm. "Oh, Eleanor, Marcus, and I think so alike now? We're practically the same person." "Right, darling?" Marcus nodded absently, still focused on his phone. The son who'd once explained complex technical concepts with passionate precision now seemed incapable of independent contribution to conversation. His personality had been subsumed so completely that he appeared almost hypnotized. After they left, Jennifer and I sat in my living room processing what we'd witnessed. "It's like she's erasing him," Jennifer said quietly, "replacing everything. That makes Marcus himself with her own agenda." "The financial changes worry me most," I admitted. "He's liquidating stable investments for unknown ventures she's promoting. That's completely contrary to how Peter taught him to manage money." "Should we try talking to him together?" Jennifer suggested. "Maybe if both of us express concern." But I suspected that approach would only trigger greater defensiveness. Marcus had already begun viewing family input as interference. Kendra had successfully reframed our lifetime of support as controlling behavior requiring liberation. Direct confrontation would likely push him further into her influence. The pattern was clear in retrospect: systematic isolation from family support, financial entanglement creating dependence, personality overriding, eliminating independent thought. Each step had been calculated to increase control while decreasing outside influence. The son who'd called me excitedly about meeting someone special had been transformed into a stranger who viewed family bonds as obstacles to success. As December progressed toward its painful climax, the accumulated changes coalesced into undeniable transformation. The methodical analyst had become an impulsive risk-taker. The family-oriented son had turned into an isolated stranger. The financially prudent professional now made reckless investments at someone else's direction. Every value we'd instilled, every trait we'd nurtured, every bond we'd strengthened, all were being systematically dismantled by someone who'd appeared in his life mere months earlier. The stage was set for confrontation, though I couldn't have predicted its specific trigger. Marcus had been primed to view family concern as toxic interference. Kendra had positioned herself as his sole source of guidance and validation. The son who'd once sought my input on major decisions now saw my presence as a threat to his newfound direction. The inciting incident, my desperate attempt to reach him on his birthday, would merely ignite tensions that had been building since Kendra's calculated entrance into our lives. Looking back, I can identify numerous moments when different choices might have altered the trajectory. Earlier intervention, subtler approaches, indirect influence through his professional network, all represented paths not taken. But by December, the transformation was so complete that only dramatic disruption could penetrate the walls Kendra had constructed around my son. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to protect Marcus from potential harm, I'd triggered the very rejection Kendra had been orchestrating. My maternal concern had been weaponized against our relationship, twisted into evidence of the control she claimed I wielded. The confrontation she'd been building toward had finally arrived, and I'd walked directly into the trap she'd set. As snow began falling that December evening, I stood at my front door watching Marcus's car disappear into the night. The son who'd driven away bore little resemblance to the man who'd called me 4 months earlier, excited about meeting someone special. That enthusiastic professional had been replaced by a defensive stranger who saw family love as manipulation, and lifetime bonds as chains requiring breaking. The inciting incident was complete. Marcus had ordered me from his life, believing it to be his own decision rather than the culmination of Kendra's careful campaign. I was now positioned exactly where she wanted me, excluded, silenced, unable to interfere with whatever plans she had for my son's future. But what Kendra hadn't anticipated was that mothers don't simply disappear when ordered away. Sometimes they retreat strategically, waiting for the moment when their children need them most. That moment would come sooner than any of us expected. The call came at 2:17 p.m. the next day, December 22nd. I was in my kitchen, mechanically washing the breakfast dishes I'd been unable to face that morning when Marcus's ringtone shattered the silence. My hands were still wet when I grabbed the phone, seeing his name on the screen with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "Mom?" His voice was strained, barely recognizable. "Mom, I need you." Those 3 words, so different from last night's cold dismissal, sent ice through my veins. "Marcus, what's wrong? Where are you?" "I'm at the police station. The 3rd precinct. They're saying... God, Mom, they're saying I embezzled from my own company. They have documents, transfers, everything with my signature, but I didn't do this. I swear I didn't do any of this." I gripped the counter for support, my mind racing to process this information. "Slow down, honey. Tell me exactly what happened." I went to the office early this morning to catch up on work. When I logged into our corporate account, everything was gone. $3.8 million, Our entire operational fund, the investor capital, everything. The transfers show my authorization, my digital signature, but Mom, I never made these transactions. Where's Kendra? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. A pause. Then, in a voice that broke my heart, I can't reach her. Her phone's disconnected. I went to her apartment. She gave me a key last week, but it's empty. Completely empty. Like she was never there. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my son's world crashing down around him through the phone, every assumption and trust he'd placed in Kendra crumbling with this revelation. Listen to me, I said, forcing calm into my voice. Don't say anything else to the police without a lawyer. I'm calling Robert Steinberg. He handled your father's estate work, but he has criminal defense experience too. I'll be there within the hour. Mom, His voice cracked. I'm sorry. For last night. For everything. You tried to warn me, and None of that matters now, I interrupted. What matters is getting you through this. Stay calm, don't answer questions, and wait for the lawyer. I love you. As I hung up, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from fury. The woman who'd spent months dismantling my family had orchestrated something far more sinister than mere emotional manipulation. She'd positioned my son for complete destruction, and he'd walked into her trap with the blind trust she'd so carefully cultivated. I called Robert Steinberg while racing to change clothes. The veteran attorney listened to my abbreviated explanation with professional calm, promising to meet us at the precinct within 45 minutes. His parting advice was stark. Tell Marcus to invoke his right to remain silent immediately. The less he says before I arrive, the better. The drive to the police station passed in a blur of city streets and racing thoughts. Everything made sense. Now, the financial liquidations, the joint investments, the systematic isolation from family who might have spotted the scheme. Kendra hadn't been building a relationship. She'd been constructing a framework for fraud, with my son as the designated fall guy. I found Marcus in a small consultation room, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his face pale and drawn. The confident professional was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost and terrified. When he saw me, something crumbled in his expression. Mom, he whispered, and suddenly he was in my arms, this grown man who'd banished me just hours ago now clinging like the child he'd once been. We'll figure this out, I promised, holding him tightly. But first, you need to tell me everything. Every detail about the financial arrangements with Kendra. What emerged over the next hour, with Robert Steinberg taking careful notes, was a masterclass in sophisticated fraud. Kendra had systematically gained access to every aspect of Marcus's financial life, corporate accounts, personal investments, even cryptocurrency holdings he'd never mentioned to me. She'd convinced him to add her as a signatory on accounts for emergency business opportunities that might arise while he was traveling. She said it was standard practice in venture capital, Marcus explained, his voice hollow. Quick decisions requiring immediate fund transfers. I thought we were building something together. The scope of the deception was breathtaking. Over the past 3 months, Kendra had orchestrated a complex series of transfers that appeared to originate from Marcus's authorizations. She'd used his home computer while he slept, accessing saved passwords and security credentials he'd trustingly shared. The final massive transfer, the one that had drained the company accounts, had been initiated at 3:47 a.m. while Marcus slept, beside her. The digital forensics will be crucial, Robert noted. We'll need to prove Marcus was physically asleep when these transfers occurred. Do you have any security cameras? Sleep tracking apps? Anything that could establish your whereabouts? Roykok nodded slowly. I wear a fitness tracker that monitors sleep patterns, and my building has security footage of all entrances. Good. We'll subpoena everything. Robert turned to me. Mrs. Chen, I'll need any documentation you might have gathered. About Ms. Winters. Any investigation you conducted could be valuable. I thought of my notebooks at home, filled with observations and concerns I'd documented over the past months. I have detailed notes about behavioral changes, timeline discrepancies, and several photos from family gatherings. I also recorded dates when Marcus mentioned financial decisions that seemed out of character. Robert's eyes sharpened with interest. Bring everything. In fraud cases, patterns of behavior are often as important as financial evidence. As the afternoon wore on, the full picture emerged. Kendra, which investigators would later confirm wasn't even her real name, had executed similar schemes in 3 other states. Her MO was consistent. Target successful but isolated professionals, create romantic relationships, gain financial access, then orchestrate fraudulent transfers that implicated the victim while she disappeared with the funds. She's been doing this for at least 7 years, Detective Morrison explained as she joined our consultation. We've connected her to similar cases in Phoenix, Denver, and Atlanta. You're actually lucky, Mr. Chen. You're the first victim still in possession of physical evidence that might help us track her down. Lucky? Marcus laughed bitterly. I've lost everything. My company's funds, my personal savings, my reputation. Your freedom, the detective interrupted gently. The other victims are all serving prison sentences for embezzlement they didn't commit. Your mother's intervention, as painful as last night was, created a paper trail of family concern that supports your claim of manipulation. This revelation silenced Marcus. He turned to look at me with dawning comprehension. Your investigation, it wasn't just motherly concern, was it? You knew something was seriously wrong. I knew she was dangerous, I admitted. I didn't know how dangerous until now. But Marcus, every note I made, every concern I documented, it was all because I couldn't bear to watch her destroy you. As evening approached, the investigation intensified. Cybercrime specialists had been called in. Forensic accountants were tracing the money transfers, and multi-state law enforcement agencies were coordinating their response. The sophistication of Kendra's scheme became increasingly apparent with each new discovery. She used shell companies in offshore jurisdictions, one specialist explained. The money was routed through at least 12 different accounts before disappearing into cryptocurrency exchanges. It's a labyrinth designed to defeat tracking. But investigators had something they'd lacked in previous cases: real-time discovery and a victim with resources to fight back. Marcus's company had cyber insurance that covered forensic investigation. His personal documentation, combined with my observational notes, created a timeline that clearly showed manipulation and coercion. As night fell, exhaustion was setting in when Detective Morrison returned with significant news. "We've found her," she announced. Or rather, we found where she was 6 hours ago. TSA records show she tried to board a flight to Costa Rica this morning, but there was an issue with her passport. An issue? Robert pressed. It was flagged as potentially fraudulent. She's traveling under the name Catherine Walsh, but the biometric data triggered an alert from our Phoenix office. She abandoned the airport before security could detain her. This meant Kendra was still in the country, likely scrambling for an alternate escape route. The detective explained that BOLOs, be on the lookout alerts, had been issued to all transportation hubs, but catching her would require swift action. We need to freeze those offshore accounts before she can access them through alternative channels. Morrison continued. Mr. Chen, we'll need your full cooperation in filing emergency injunctions. The irony wasn't lost on me. The financial entanglements that had trapped Marcus were now becoming the snare that might catch Kendra. Every account she'd convinced him to open, every authorization she'd obtained, now created a digital trail that investigators could follow. As we prepared to leave the station, Marcus finally released on his own recognizance thanks to Robert's advocacy and the emerging evidence of fraud. My son turned to me with tears in his eyes. How do I come back from this? He asked. Even if we catch her, even if I'm cleared legally, My reputation is destroyed. No one will trust me with investments again. Everything I've built is gone. Not everything, I said firmly. You have your family. You have your intelligence and work ethic. You have the truth on your side. Companies can be rebuilt. Reputations can be restored. What matters is that you're free and we're fighting this together. The next 3 days blurred together in a marathon of legal procedures, forensic investigation, and strategic planning. My kitchen table became command central, covered with laptops, documents, and an ever-growing map of Kendra's previous schemes. Jennifer had flown in from St. Paul, bringing her husband's expertise in financial law. Together, we formed an unlikely, investigative team. The breakthrough came on Christmas morning. While most families were opening presents, we were huddled around my laptop when an encrypted message arrived through Marcus's company system. It was from Kendra. I never meant for it to go this far, the message read. The authorities are wrong about me. I'm not who they think I am. If you want your money back and answers to your questions, meet me alone at Minnehaha Falls at 2 p.m. No police, no lawyers, just you. This is your only chance to understand the truth. Absolutely not, Robert said immediately. This is either a trap or a desperate attempt to manipulate Marcus further. But Detective Morrison saw opportunity. We could use this. Wire Marcus up. Position undercover officers throughout the park. No, I interrupted, surprising everyone. She'll spot surveillance immediately. She's evaded capture in multiple states. She knows what to look for. But she might not expect me. Mom, no, Marcus protested. I won't let you put yourself at risk for my mistakes. This isn't about your mistakes, I said. This is about our family. She underestimated us once before, thinking I was just an interfering mother she could exclude. Let her underestimate me again. After heated debate, a compromise was reached. I would go to the park as a concerned mother looking for her missing son, who was supposedly meeting Kendra. If I encountered her, I'd try to engage her in conversation while wearing a recording device. Law enforcement would maintain distant perimeter positions, but wouldn't approach unless signaled. Minnehaha Falls in winter was a frozen cascade of ice, beautiful but treacherous. I arrived early, taking time to familiarize myself with the paths and potential escape routes. My heart was pounding, but 40 years of maintaining classroom calm served me well. I looked like any other grandmother enjoying a winter walk. At 1:58 p.m., I saw her. Kendra stood near the overlook, wearing an expensive white coat and designer boots unsuited for icy paths. She was scanning the area nervously, clearly expecting Marcus. When she spotted me approaching, her expression shifted from anticipation to confusion, then calculation. Mrs. Chen, she said coolly. Marcus couldn't make it? He's indisposed, I replied, matching her tone. Legal matters, as I'm sure you're aware. But I thought perhaps you and I should talk. Mother to, what exactly are you to my son? Her laugh was brittle. Still trying to categorize everything? That's your problem, Eleanor. You see the world in such binary terms? Good, bad, truth, lies. Reality is more complex. Reality is that you stole nearly $4 million and framed my son for embezzlement. That seems fairly binary to me. Stole? Her perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. I invested those funds precisely as Marcus and I discussed. The fact that he's now experiencing buyer's remorse doesn't constitute theft. And your empty apartment? Your disconnected phone? Your attempt to flee the country? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her features. You've been busier than I expected. Though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You've been investigating me from the beginning, haven't you? Mothers protect their children, I said simply. It's what we do. Protect, she repeated, her voice turning bitter. You have no idea what that word means. You've lived your comfortable suburban life, teaching your chemistry, never facing real adversity. Some of us had to claw our way out of circumstances you couldn't imagine. Then help me understand, I suggested, sensing an opening. Tell me your real story, not the fiction you fed Marcus. What followed was 20 minutes of revelation that the recording device captured in full. Kendra, whose real name was Catherine Walsh, had grown up in foster care, bounced between homes where survival meant becoming whoever caregivers wanted. She'd learned to read people, to shapeshift into their ideal companion, to extract resources because no one else would provide them. Your son represented everything I never had, she admitted. Stability, family support, unearned confidence in the world's fairness. Yes, I targeted him. Yes, I manipulated him, but part of me actually fell for the fantasy I was creating. For a few months, I almost believed I could be the person he saw. But you couldn't, I observed. So you fell back on old patterns. Old patterns are all I have, she said, and for a moment, I saw genuine pain beneath the polished facade. Do you know what it's like to reinvent yourself every few years? To never form real connections because you're always planning your next escape? Then stop running, I urged. Face the consequences. Marcus cared for you. He might even forgive you if you return the money and tell the truth. Her laugh was harsh. The money's gone, dispersed to pay debts you wouldn't understand. And the truth? The truth is that I'm exactly what you always suspected, a predator who saw weakness and exploited it. I don't believe that's all you are, I said, surprising us both. I think you're someone who learned terrible lessons about survival and never found a different path. But it's not too late to choose differently. For a moment, something shifted in her expression, a glimpse of the person she might have been, under different circumstances. Then the mask slammed back into place. Save your teacher's psychology for your students, she snapped. I didn't come here for redemption. I came to tell Marcus something, but since he sent his mother instead... She reached into her coat and I tensed, but she pulled out only an envelope. Give this to him. It's not the money. That's truly gone. But it's information about the scheme the prosecutors haven't found yet. Details that will clear his name. Completely. I took the envelope carefully. Why? Because he was kind to me, she said quietly. Genuinely kind without agenda. I haven't experienced that often. Consider it my version of a Christmas gift. She turned to leave, then paused. You were right to protect him from me. I would have destroyed him eventually. I destroy everyone who gets close. It's what I do. It's what you've done, I corrected. It doesn't have to be what you continue doing. She smiled sadly. Still teaching to the end. Goodbye, Mrs. Chen. Take care of your son. He's lucky to have you. I watched her walk away, fighting the urge to call out that law enforcement was waiting. But something held me back. Perhaps teacher's instinct, perhaps mother's intuition. I'd gotten what we needed, the recording of her confession and whatever information the envelope contained. When I returned to my car, I found Detective Morrison waiting. We had her, she said with frustration. Clear shot at arrest. Why didn't you signal? Because sometimes, I said, handing over the envelope and recording device, the best outcome isn't always the obvious one. The envelope contained exactly what Kendra had promised. Detailed documentation of hidden accounts, forged authorizations she'd created without Marcus's knowledge, and a full confession that explicitly cleared him of any knowing participation in the fraud. It was everything the prosecutors needed to dismiss charges against my son. But it was the handwritten note at the bottom that affected Marcus most when he read it later that evening. I'm sorry for using your trust against you. In another life, under different circumstances, maybe I could have been the person you believed I was. Your mother saw through me from the beginning because she knows what real love looks like. Listen to her. Trust her. Let her help you heal from what I've done. K. The legal resolution came swiftly after that. With Kendra's confession and documentation, prosecutors formally dropped all charges against Marcus. The investigation shifted entirely to recovering the stolen funds and tracking Kendra's previous crimes. Though she'd disappeared again, vanishing. As thoroughly as she'd arrived, her voluntary confession had given Marcus what he needed most: complete exoneration. The personal recovery took longer. Marcus moved back home temporarily, needing the familiar surroundings and family support to process the trauma of betrayal. We spent long evenings talking about trust, about judgment, about the balance between openness and protection. Slowly, the son I'd known began re-emerging from the shell Kendra had created. Jennifer's presence helped enormously. She brought professional insight from her social work experience, helping Marcus understand how sophisticated manipulators operate. "It's not a failure of intelligence," she assured him repeatedly. "Predators like Kendra succeed because they exploit our best qualities: trust, love, generosity. The alternative is living closed off from genuine connection." Marcus's company survived, though wounded. His business partners, initially skeptical, were convinced by the evidence and impressed by his transparency throughout the investigation. Several major investors actually increased their commitments, citing his handling of the crisis as evidence of character. "Anyone can manage success," one noted. "It's how people handle catastrophe that reveals their true nature." The investigation eventually recovered about 60% of the stolen funds through frozen accounts and traced transfers. While substantial losses remained, insurance covered much of the gap. More importantly, the experience had taught valuable lessons about financial controls and security protocols that would protect the company going forward. 3 months after that Christmas confrontation, our family gathered for Easter dinner. Marcus was still rebuilding, but the haunted look had left his eyes. He'd started therapy, joined a support group for fraud victims, and even begun dating again, this time with appropriate caution and family transparency. "I've been thinking about Kendra lately," he admitted over dessert. "Not with anger exactly, more like pity? She had every advantage I had in terms of intelligence and capability, but none of the support structure. It makes me wonder who I might have become under her circumstances." "That's empathy talking," I observed. "It's one of your best qualities. Just remember that understanding someone's motivations doesn't excuse their actions." "I know," he said, "but I can't help thinking about what you said to her in the park, about choosing differently. Do you think she ever will?" I considered the question carefully. "I think everyone has the capacity for change. Whether they act on it depends on many factors. But I hope somewhere, somehow, she finds a path to redemption. Even after what she did to me? Especially after what she did to you. Forgiveness isn't about excusing harm. It's about releasing its hold on your future. You're healing, growing, moving forward. That's what matters." As spring turned to summer, life gradually returned to new normal patterns. Marcus found an apartment closer to my house, maintaining independence while accepting the value of family. Proximity. His company implemented new security measures and actually grew stronger through the crisis response. Most surprisingly, he began speaking at business conferences about fraud prevention, turning his painful experience into valuable education for others. One evening in late June, as we sat on my porch watching fireflies dance through the garden, Marcus made an observation that showed how far he'd traveled on his healing journey. "You know what I realized?" he said. "When I told you to leave that night, when I said there was no room for you, I was actually describing my own situation. Kendra had left no room for anyone else in my life. She'd filled every space with her influence until I couldn't see past it. But you did see past it eventually, only because you created the disruption that exposed everything. If you'd stayed, that night, kept arguing, she would have used it as evidence of your interference. By leaving when I demanded it, you took away her weapon. She couldn't paint you as controlling when you'd literally done exactly what I asked." I smiled at this. Insight. Sometimes the most powerful position is the one that appears powerless. Is that a teaching philosophy or a parenting one? Both, I admitted, though I certainly never expected to apply it in such dramatic circumstances. We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from weathering crisis together and emerging stronger. The son who'd banished me had returned not as the same person, but as someone wiser, more grounded, more appreciative of genuine connection over surface attraction. As summer progressed, the investigation into Kendra's crimes expanded to include federal agencies. Her pattern of interstate fraud had created a web of victims whose stories eerily paralleled Marcus's experience. Each had been a successful professional, somewhat isolated, targeted through their industry connections. Each had experienced the same systematic manipulation, rapid relationship progression, financial entanglement, eventual devastation. But Marcus's case had broken the pattern. For the first time, one of her victims had family support that refused to be eliminated. One had maintained documentation of concerns. One had caught her scheme in real time rather than discovering it months after her disappearance. These differences had not only saved Marcus from imprisonment, but created the first real opportunity for justice. In August, news came that Kendra had been arrested in Vancouver, attempting to cross into Canada with falsified documents. The international nature of her capture meant complex extradition proceedings, but prosecutors felt confident she would eventually face trial. Marcus was asked if he wanted to attend the proceedings, but he declined. "I've moved past needing to see her punished," he explained. "What I needed was vindication and recovery. I have both now. Let the legal system handle the rest." This mature response reflected the genuine healing that had occurred. Through therapy and family support, Marcus had processed the trauma without letting it define him. He'd learned to recognize manipulation tactics, establish healthier boundaries, and most importantly, to value the family connections that had ultimately saved him. On a warm September evening, our family gathered for Marcus's 40th birthday, the one Kendra had prevented us from celebrating the previous year. As we sat around my dining table, the same one where so many family discussions had taken place over the decades, I felt profound gratitude for this moment of restoration. "I want to make a toast," Marcus announced, raising his glass. "To second chances. To family that never gives up. And to my mother, who knew when to hold on and when to let go, and whose perfect timing saved my life." As glasses clinked around the table, I caught my reflection in the window. A 70-year-old woman who'd faced down a sophisticated criminal with nothing but maternal instinct and lifetime accumulated wisdom. The teacher in me recognized this as the ultimate final exam, one I'd passed not through academic knowledge but through understanding human nature and the power of strategic patience. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my kitchen writing in the journal I'd started after Peter's death. This entry was different from the observational notes I'd kept about Kendra. This was reflection on a chapter closed and lessons learned. "Love isn't always about holding tight," I wrote. "Sometimes it's about knowing when to step back and trust the foundation you've built." Marcus ordered me to leave, and in leaving, I created the space for truth to emerge. The next day's shock wasn't just his arrest. It was his recognition that isolation isn't strength, and that family bonds, properly tended, can weather any storm. As autumn arrived, bringing another cycle of change to Minnesota, our family had found new equilibrium. The crisis that had threatened to destroy us had instead revealed our resilience. Marcus's company thrived with new security measures and restored reputation. Jennifer's family visited more frequently, recognizing the importance of maintaining connections. I continued my financial literacy work, now incorporating fraud prevention education based on our hard-won experience. The woman who'd systematically isolated my son had unwittingly strengthened every bond she'd tried to break. In ordering me to leave, Marcus had triggered the sequence of events that exposed her deception. The shock he'd experienced the next day wasn't just legal crisis. It was the recognition that pushing away family support had nearly cost him everything. But the greatest transformation was in Marcus himself. The man who'd once dismissed family traditions as outdated patterns now initiated new ones. Sunday dinners resumed with renewed appreciation. Museum visits were scheduled months in advance. Phone calls came regularly without prompting. The son who'd accused me of toxic interference now spoke publicly about the value of family vigilance. The red flags were there, he'd tell audiences at fraud prevention seminars. But I'd been conditioned to see concern as control, questions as intrusion, family bonds as limitations. It took losing everything to understand that the people who truly love you don't want to limit your growth. They want to protect it. 1 year after that terrible December night, as snow again began falling on Minneapolis, our family gathered for an early Christmas celebration. The trauma had faded to manageable memory, replaced by gratitude for lessons learned and bonds strengthened. As I watched my son help his nieces decorate cookies, engaged, present, whole, I knew we'd emerged from darkness into deeper appreciation for light. The doorbell rang unexpectedly, and Marcus went to answer it. He returned carrying a small package, addressed to me, no return address, postmarked from somewhere in British Columbia. Inside was a simple card with familiar handwriting. Mrs. Chen, you were right. I did have a choice, and I'm finally making different ones. The road to redemption is longer than I imagined, but I'm walking it. Thank you for seeing possibility where others saw only pattern. Thank you for showing me what real family looks like. I hope your son knows how fortunate he is. KPS, I'm returning to school, legitimate this time. Education major. Maybe I can help kids before they become what I became. It's a start. I shared the note with Marcus, watching emotions play across his face. Surprise, pain, hope, and, finally, peace. Do you think she means it? He asked. I think she wants to mean it, I replied. That's often where change begins. As our family settled back into holiday celebrations, I reflected on the journey we'd traveled. A son's harsh dismissal had led to shocking revelations that exposed carefully planned deception. A mother's strategic retreat had created space for truth to emerge. A family's refusal to abandon one of their own had defeated a scheme designed to isolate and destroy. The shock Marcus experienced the day after ordering me to leave wasn't just his arrest or Kendra's disappearance. It was the recognition that pushing away the very people who could help him had nearly led to his destruction. But from that shock had come wisdom, from destruction had come rebuilding, and from isolation had come deeper connection than ever before. In teaching, I'd always believed that the most profound lessons came not from perfect execution, but from mistakes recognized and corrected. Our family's story had proven this truth on a scale I'd never imagined. We'd all made mistakes, Marcus in his blind trust, me in my initial approach, Jennifer in her hesitation to intervene. But we'd learned, adapted, and emerged stronger as Midnight approached on New Year's Eve. Our family stood together on my back porch, watching fireworks light up the Minneapolis skyline. Marcus stood beside me, solid and present in a way he hadn't been for years. Thank you, he said quietly, for not giving up on me even when I gave up on us. Family doesn't give up, I replied, echoing my own mother's words from decades past. We might step back, we might adjust our approach, but we never truly leave. The calendar turned to another year, bringing new possibilities and challenges unknown. But whatever came, I knew our family would face it together. Not perfect, not without conflict, but united by bonds that had been tested in fire and emerged refined rather than broken. The son who'd ordered me to leave had discovered that physical distance couldn't sever connections built over a lifetime. The shocking aftermath of his demand had revealed both the fragility of isolation and the strength of family bonds properly tended. In the end, leaving when ordered had been the greatest act of love, creating space for truth to emerge and allowing my son to find his own way back to the family that had never truly let him go. As the celebrations wound down and everyone prepared to leave, Marcus hugged me with the same intensity he'd shown as a child returning from summer camp, grateful to be home, appreciative of constancy, aware of how close he'd come to losing it all. "Same time next week for Sunday dinner?" he asked, though we both knew the answer. "Same time," I confirmed. "Every week." Some traditions, once nearly lost, become more precious in their restoration. Some bonds, once tested, prove stronger for the trial. And sometimes, the most shocking revelations lead not to destruction, but to deeper understanding of what truly matters. The teacher in me filed this final lesson away. Love isn't possession or control. It's knowing when to hold tight and when to let go, when to speak and when to remain silent, when to fight and when to retreat. Most importantly, it's understanding that true connection transcends physical presence, that being ordered to leave doesn't mean abandoning someone to their fate. As I closed my door on another year, I offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey we'd survived. The road had been painful, the lessons harsh, but the destination, this place of renewed connection and hard-won wisdom, made every difficult step worthwhile. Outside, snow continued falling on the city that had been our family's home for generations. Inside, the warmth of love restored and bonds renewed created sanctuary against any storm. The son who'd banished me had found his way home. The family that had bent beneath deception's weight had not broken. And the mother who'd been ordered to leave had discovered that sometimes the greatest gift we can give our children is the space to recognize what they've pushed away. The shock of the next day had transformed into the wisdom of the years that followed. And in that transformation, we'd all found our way back to what mattered most: each other. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.